Well, now we're here actually inside the gallery with Alison. Alison, it's great to meet you.
Thank you.
You heard Dane talking a little bit about your place in contemporary art and your family. Tell me a little bit about whatever you might want to add to that.
Well, it's funny because I never really think of think of it as a place in contemporary art. Coming from an artistic family, that it's more like the family business, and that it was a very natural sort of place to go. And so when I hear stuff like Dane trying to like carve out this little niche for us to fit within this grander scheme is always kind of entertaining to me, because it's really just been kind of what we've always done.
The family was like soap or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my father was an art conservator, and then my mother, of course, is Alison Saar, and so it was all about I think mainly she gave us stuff to do to keep us out of the way. She was doing printmaking and etchings at the time, and so we were always constantly being fed art materials to kind of just stay out from underfoot.
So in some interviews I've seen you talking about actually helping her working with the pieces that she's putting together.
Yeah, I've kind of been her studio assistant a couple of times, and hence my children have been my studio assistants as well, and so the legacy lives on.
Well, Dane told me that you have a son and a daughter, right?
Yes,
that one is very interested in...
One of them's currently at CalArts, and the other one, we just started putting out applications for, for other art programs as well.
And your husband teaches at CalArts?
And my husband teaches at CalArts.
It's an arts family.
Yeah, it's like a mafia here.
Well, let's walk up to Inheritance. This is the piece that we see on the sheet that comes out, the publicity material, so it's obviously an important piece to you. It's a portrait of your mother, you say?
It is, and it came about foremostly from a trip that both she and I took together to Senegal, and I was just really blown away by these young children, carrying things to the market, carrying their siblings, and sort of no complaining. I think of my own children, and I think of so many of their friends and whatnot, to get them to take out the trash is a major event. And so I was really impressed by these child atlases. And so I had this idea, and then really thinking about in terms of who my mother is and how she was very much formed by her father dying kind of suddenly, and calling her to the bedside and saying, please take care of your mother and your, infant brother and sister. And so it really talks about who she became.
She had,
right. And so in this case, this is a child maybe about 5 or 6, which is the age of my mother's father, the age my mother was when her father passed. And she's kind of carrying this sort of burden of a wounded world, and so it speaks of a lot of things. It also speaks of kind of the children coming up and what they're going to inherit in terms of our world as well.
Yeah. So it's a cloth tied together. Anything you'd say specifically about that?
Well, actually, what's wonderful about this project and what Dane failed to mention when he was talking about what drew me here was this project in and of itself, and that we started talking about the possibility of doing a cast edition. And I was thrilled. I'm really thrilled to know that Santa Barbara City College is one of the few schools that has a foundry. And so it was really thrilling for me to come and make an edition, which is fabulous, but also to kind of have this kind of incorporate, it makes the exhibit sort of important within the student body and working with the school, and then in turn, hopefully we'll sell some of these and it'll be able to raise some money for the gallery. So kind of, it's a nice mix.
Yeah, it's a great.
So that was something that's really attractive for me.
And people might recognize your piece Terra Firma from the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. It was on exhibit really recently. It's a man lying down.
Right.
It's made out of some of the materials that we'll see later on.
My classic fountains.
Right. So we want to emphasize the Santa Barbara connection since we're in Santa Barbara.
Absolutely. And living in LA, we're not that far away. But actually, another nice thing, just coming back and forth over the last year, it's really kind of like open Santa Barbara to me. It's funny how you can grow up in Los Angeles and not really know the town so well. So
that's great.
It's manifold.
Let's walk over to Cakewalk. And this is, you said, the oldest piece of yours in the gallery.
Yeah. Cakewalk. She's rather heavy. She's was carved out of heavy pieces, I think, of cottonwood. So she's really dense. The title comes from Cakewalk, which is kind of like this sort of dance that was part of a ragtime tradition, which was, and I think the term ragtime came from that there would be these sort of dances, almost secret dances, and rags would be tied to lead you to the place where these dances would be held.
Okay.
And the actual cakewalk, while it was kind of interesting on two levels, one was that it was an actual contest, and so people would bring some money to the party, you know, and then if they won the contest, which was the cakewalk, which is basically promenading and high kicking, if you kicked, some say you kicked the cake off, but I think you had to, whoever kicked the highest or kicked something off of a platform
and thus the legs moving
win,
up and down.
Right, would win this prize. But also cakewalk was really this sort of satirical or parody of sort of the pompous nature of white slave owners.
Absolutely,
so,
yeah.
Here, I'll show you how she works.
All right.
Yes, you have to have a little bit of strength. You can, and then she kind of wants to kind of move around and do her own thing. She's a little hazardous, actually. And so she's like a giant puppet. And then that's also, I mean, also the idea of the piece was kind of how, as women, and often women of color, were manipulated not only by sort of the media and ideas of beauty and fashion, but African American women or women of color also have to play off of, this sort of Western idea of beauty and how we're constantly straightening our hair and kind of jumping through all these hoops to kind of be deemed acceptable.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty much, so she's kind of doing this song and dance.
Well, I know that sometimes you have a title like Cakewalk that has a little bit lighter aura than the piece itself, which can be pretty dark. I mean, this is a piece that's really striking, and we can sort of feel the history coming off of it.
Right, yeah. She's a bit of a heavy, pun intended, but I really like this sort of idea, and I think that also comes out of an African American tradition of taking very sort of heavy, dark subject matter and putting these sort of light. If you look at the blues, for example, which is very influential in my work. That you're talking about some really heavy stuff, but there's always this humor in it and some sort of levity to it, which makes it bearable.
Yeah, right, yeah. Well, as we walk from Cakewalk, what's the next piece here in the gallery that you'd like to take a look at?
Well, let's kind of head this way, if that's all right.
Okay, let's do that.
So this piece is called Suckle. They're cast bronze skillets. I used found skillets and I kind of sculpted these individual breasts on them. And they're very much, again, influenced by the African, I'm trying to think of the African granary doors. The granary doors from Mali.
Okay.
And you'll look and there'll be these doors and they'll often have multiple sets of breasts on them. And this is kind of like women as not only as the sort of imagery of fertility, but also as nurturers and providers of nutrition, milk, but also as protectors. And so all of these things kind of come into this sort of contemporary American version of these things, which are kind of these sort of breast guardian things on skillets and, excuse me. The skillets are these sort of found skillets that are kind of crusty with grease and use and have this sort of history to them as well.
It's interesting to me because when I look at your pieces, they seem to be so multifaceted. So when I was looking at these pieces, I thought some of what you just said, it's called Suckle, the four pieces. I was also thinking of a darker thing, of the slave owner, taking advantage of sex and food and childcare, and that seemed to me to be potentially buried inside there. Is that something that you were thinking about at all?
That's really prevalent in a lot of the other works, but actually that's part of it. And I had done also another series that dealt with skillets, and there were portraits of nannies, and again that kind of comes into this sort of nurturing beyond, nurturing strangers' children or nurturing someone else's children, and sort of this sort of
without any recompense, really, yeah.
Right. So that does kind of fit in with these as well, yeah.
And so Dogon, you were saying, is the tribe.
Yeah, right. The granary doors.
So if we walk from here, what's next on our tour?
Let's step over to
Sea of Serenity. Now this is a piece that is a painting of a sculpture, is that correct?
Right, yeah, it's actually an ink drawing with all these sort of cut out moths and things like that. And I often do that. I often will make a sculpture and then kind of go back and do a post-study of them. It's sort of a cleansing palette. You know, if I can't completely let go, some of these pieces are very labor intensive, and so it kind of helps me let go of it and kind of rethink and maybe fix some things that I didn't like about the sculpture as well. But this comes out of a series. The title, Sea of Serenity, is one of the names of the moons, what were then thought of as lakes by Galileo. And so he had all these really beautiful names for dark areas on the moon. And they're just so beautiful. And so I really started, did a whole series of drawings and sculptures named after these different seas, quote unquote seas. And so, and this is sort of, you know, the idea again of women as specimens. And so she has all these sort of moth, you know, specimens pinned on her.
Appropriate to the moon, naturally,
Yeah, and so then she becomes a sort of specimen herself. And again, the idea of moths and moons and lunacy and this sort of madness sort of undertones going on with it as well.
You mentioned just a minute ago the phrase work intensive, and I know I've read in one interview you're talking about using a chainsaw, for instance, like with Cakewalk. Tell me a little bit about you in process of making a big piece like that.
Kind of like my little macho outlet. And I think, you know, it's, we're, you know, being 5'2", that, you know, that's, again, you know, a Napoleon sort of complex thing I'm working out there, sort of. But I like that. I've always liked, you know, this real sort of physical aspect of the work, and that sometimes I'll have assistants working, and then it becomes kind of like this sewing bee where we're all hammering together. And I remember one time we were doing it, and we started getting some rhythmic things going on with our hammers and stuff like that. And so it's some, you know, whereas kind of the coming up with the ideas and the drawings is very sort of solitary. I really like, you know, the sort of physical aspect, especially when it can be shared with other people. So that's
I know you mentioned in one interview talking about working with your father and actually touching a piece of sculpture and saying, this is it, and hands off is hard for you. You know, you probably shouldn't be touching these pieces,
getting busted.
But that tactile sense is
It is,
really
and
important.
you know, I mean, I'm kind of being revealed here in that I'm constantly talking with my hands and stuff like that. But yeah, that was really one of the grand advantages of being an art conservator working with my father, is that we got to, you know, touch everything.
To touch the stuff.
And and it's, you know, and most of the, I mean, again, even when I do drawings, they're all very dimensional and textural. It's very hard for me to do anything that's perfectly flat. When the prints, I always like a lot of depth to them, or in some of the prints, you can see that I've actually added things on top of them, things that hang off. So I'm very much a 3D kind of girl.
That's important, yeah. Well, can we walk over to Bat Boys?
Yeah, sounds good.